Hello, everybody. Welcome into Tide and Tiger Podcast again. Myself, Scott Griffin, along with Kevin Scarbinsky of AL.com. And we've got a special guest on today, Kevin, don't we?
He is special. People in this state remember him, I think, for the most part, fondly.
Yes, for the most part.
For the most part, it's the Akron head coach, Terry Bowden. Terry, how are you doing?
I'm doing fine. Just got through with our practice. One more week to go before we play Penn State, so I'm doing pretty well.
Well, we'll get into that in just a moment, but we wanted to have you on talking a little bit about, your connection to this state and everything with what's going on. Obviously, you've got great connection. Kind of give us the cliff notes of how you're connected to Nick Saban, who was, when you were a player, he was a coach for your dad, and then, of course, Jimbo Fisher.
Well, he wasn't a coach for my dad. When Nick was a senior at Monongah High School in Monongah, West Virginia, my dad recruited him to West Virginia. Went down to Monongah. His dad, I think, had a filling station. My dad made home visits. But Nick is not very tall, and so West Virginia turned him down. He's like Jimbo. He was a great player.
Yeah.
But he was not. As a Division I player, he was not the tallest, and so my dad did not offer him. But got to know his family, but he ended up going to Kent State, which is our rival here at Akron. But then when my dad left West Virginia as the head coach, I stayed and played 3 more years, and Nick was on the staff those last 3 years I was there, coaching defensive backs. And so I've known him for that long.
Was he pretty good?
What is it, Terry, about West Virginia that makes it somewhat of a cradle of coaches?
Kevin, you wouldn't believe it. It's not a very populated state. There's 1 million people in the entire state. But within about 30 miles, you've got Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, and Rich Rodriguez. And these towns don't have 5,000 people in them. These towns are so small, they have coal mines, but they don't have many people. And then that's only about 15 minutes from Morgantown, where my brother Tommy and I were head coach in Morgantown. But it's an amazing little area. But football, there's a passion for football. And I think there's a little bit of there's a unique blue collar hard work ethic in that area. The people who grew up in the coal mines are very hardworking. They can outwork people. And I think if you think of definitions of Nick Saban or Jimbo Fisher, that's one of the things you think about, the hard work they have.
That's what Jimbo told me last week, Terry, because I said, how did you, a lot of people can't handle Nick Saban. He goes, right. I can handle him because he was just like my dad, Yeah. I mean,
and I knew Jimbo's dad.
Yeah.
Jimbo, Big Jim was a huge man. He was a disabled coal miner, got caught up in a continuous miner machine and was disabled. But he was a tough man, tough. I remember Jimbo, we would have throwing practice on summer afternoons, and he would come with his football cleats with cow manure all over him because his dad would not let him go to work out with football until he fed all the cows and did everything on the farm. So he would work him right up until football practice, and Jimbo was the only player that had cow manure all over his shoes while he practiced football.
Well, that's a great story. Terry, obviously Jimbo played for you. Mm-hmm. When did you recognize that he could one day be a coach, and not just a coach, but a successful coach, and now one of the most successful coaches in college football?
I think some of the characteristics were known even before in high school. You know who found Jimbo was Jack Hines. You remember Jack Hines, my brother-in-law?
Yeah.
Well, Jack was a high school coach at Morgantown High School. And when I got the job at Salem College, I asked Jack, who's the best athlete in this area that's not going to go to West Virginia? He says Jimbo Fisher. He's the best leader. He's the best player. He's the most competitive. He's everything you'd want. And so that's who introduced me to Jimbo Fisher. So I think when you look at quarterbacks and the type that are leaders, that are competitive, that know how to run a football team, that are cocky, that are confident, he was always that. And then, like a lot of other guys that I coached, Damian Craig's a quarterback coach. Pat Nix was a coordinator in football. Jimbo was going to be you just knew he was going to be a football coach, and he fell in love with it. I'm sure he could have done something else with that work ethic, but you just knew he had the work ethic and the confidence that you have to be a head coach.
You love talking about coaching and designing and how to attack defenses. And I think he started in baseball at Clemson, right? Then you get him, and then at Salem, I'm not even sure you had buses, but he would ride in a car with you, and you guys would just pick each other. He'd just absorb everything, right?
Well, back then I was 26 years old. Jimbo was right around 20 years old, 18, 19, 20 years old. And when we went on our bus trips our long bus trips to games, since I called plays and he was the quarterback, I would make him ride with me, and we would go over all the game plans. And so everything I knew, I had to have him know what I knew. And so we picked each other's brains since the first time I ever worked with him. And then the other thing that a lot of people don't realize, because I was so young and I had been a graduate assistant at Florida State. Our whole offense was Florida State's offense. We didn't study Salem College film. We studied Florida State film. And so the day Jimbo Fisher became a football player at Salem College, all he knew was Florida State football. All he ever saw was Florida State football. And that's all we taught all the way till we got to the end of Samford. Even at Samford, we were still teaching Florida State football.
Terry Bowden, our guest here on the Tide and Tiger podcast. Terry, how pivotal was it for all of your careers when you moved to Samford and Jimbo came with you?
Oh, it was the biggest opportunity, I think, for all of us. And it's funny, I was actually leaving Akron. I went to Akron 1 year as a quarterback coach, and I got hired by George Henshaw. You can remember that name from Florida State and Alabama, as the offensive coordinator at Tulsa. And I was in my car driving to Tulsa, and I stopped at Birmingham for the All-American Bowl. And if you remember, Tom Courts at Samford had just dismissed, or Paul Dietzel had resigned, and Tom Courts invited me over and offered me the job. And that was the same day that my dad was interviewing at Alabama, the one that he didn't get.
Yes.
And so it was kind of an unusual circumstance, but I really wanted to be at Samford because I was trying to build my career. I was 29 years old. And I said, you know what? We're sitting right here in the middle of the SEC. If you can just be successful here, maybe somebody will notice you. Maybe somebody will see you. And so the Samford it fell into my lap, but it was the job that I really wanted. Of course, it was my mother and father's alma mater, but it was also right where the SEC museum is, where the conference offices are, in the middle of the rivalry. It's the heart of football in the South. And it was just the perfect place to be at a program when they were trying to build a football program.
And you guys go 9-1, average 51.7 points a game. I mean, we think we see offense now. That's 1987, and you're throwing 51 up. It's crazy.
Yeah, we kind of had a ringer. We had a ringer because we brought Jimbo with us as the quarterback, and we had about 3 other players from Salem College that had flunked out of somewhere big. And they all ended up playing for us at Samford. But we weren't eligible for a playoff that year. My first year, just like Auburn, my first year at Samford, we were not eligible for the playoffs. And we went 9-1, and scored about 51 points a game. And I don't know, Jimbo set the Division III record for touchdown passes in a season that year. I'm sure 30 years ago it's no longer there, but it was probably the most enjoyable, fun year I've ever had when we lined up every week, and most every week we were a lot better than the team we played.
This all reminds us, Terry, this trip down memory lane.
Yeah.
So many people today identify Jimbo as a Nick Saban guy, as part of his coaching tree. But obviously, long before he jumped on the Nick Saban tree at LSU, he was part of the Bowden coaching family. And still, and those roots never leave him, obviously.
No, he was with me 14 years. Counting as playing and coaching, we were together 14 years, from playing at Salem to coaching at Samford to coaching at Auburn. And then I got into broadcasting. And then I don't know how many years he was with my dad, 3 or 4 years. But I do believe that as a head coach, at the time in which he was becoming a head coach, it was easy to be to look at Nick, who he worked for, and to see the style that he was coaching. And so I think a lot of the things he'll always have a lot of the old things he learned as a young coach. The offense, I don't think he learned any offense from Nick. Nick's a defensive coach, but he learned a lot of offense from my father and myself and my brother Jeff, and hanging around us. But I do believe you can see it at that point in time when he was becoming a head coach or moving up into the head coaching ranks, his association with Nick Saban had a huge impact on him because of how much success Nick was having. My dad, as much as I try to be like my dad, or Jimbo would try to be like my dad, we really aren't quite like my dad. He's a very unique, different kind of guy, and very, very few of us can pull off that corn pone, good old boy type of thing that my dad does so well.
Well, break it down, because you said, and then Jimbo reiterated to me last week, you said Bowden as a play caller, and he went on to say how I attack defenses, how I expose mismatches.
Right.
But program-wise, it's Saban-like, right?
I would think that, and I think it almost makes sense, because my dad started coaching. 1955 was his first head coaching year. And although my dad was a head coach in 7 decades and did a great job of transferring or changing his style at the front end of a curve, from the option to the shotgun to I formation, all the different styles, his way of running a program still was very old school, and I still do a lot of that. Nick brought an NFL approach to it. My dad spent all of his time in college. I've spent all my time in college. I think Nick brought a professional aspect to the coaching profession, a very business-like aspect to it that really was set for the 21st century and moving on into coaching that way. And to be quite honest with you, at the time Jimbo became a head coach, my dad's career was ending. I mean, if you're going to latch onto somebody, the hottest name in football is Nick Saban. If you want to get a head job, be a Nick Saban coach, because that's the ticket at that point. And I think that's important, because if it doesn't take a whole lot of common sense to ride that, because that was at that point in time, it was a critical connection to have.
One of the historical crossroads, Terry, in football in this state was the end of the 2006 season. Mike Shula gets fired. Alabama hires Nick Saban. Jimbo Fisher is trying to decide what he's going to do, go to LSU. He's offered the UAB job. He's almost there with the UAB job. Right. And then some powerful people stepped in and nixed the extra salary they were going to pay him through some boosters. How would things be different? And I know it's speculation. How might things have been different for Jimbo Fisher and for UAB football had he become the head coach of the Blazers going into 2007?
Well, the only thing I would say, because I remember I was at Samford when Gene Bartow would come over to Samford and talk to me about starting a football program, because at Samford we did the same thing. We started a football program from scratch and moved in from Division III to 1AA. So he would come over and pick my brain. The only thing I would say to that is that there were things going on at UAB that the head coach couldn't control. And Jimbo might have very well gone there and been successful. And the more successful he was, that might have just made people more mad, because there were people who did not want UAB to be successful. And you don't know what the answer to that one would be, but I can't believe he would not have been as good a coach at UAB as he has been at Florida State.
So he was probably one of the first guys you thought of when you get the Auburn job. You know, you did well at Samford. They look at you and they grab you. Besides your brothers, I mean, he's got to be the first guy you thought about.
Well, I mean, my brother Tommy was already on Pat Dye's staff, and so I retained Tommy and Wayne Hall and a few other guys. But I wanted to pick some guys up for my staff. There was no question I was going to bring Jimbo Fisher. I knew the kind of coach he was going to be. You know, I was very fortunate to have some outstanding young coaches, you know, that were GAs for me or were young coaches for me that went on to be very, very successful. And I think Jimbo, you knew right away he was going to be pretty good at doing that kind of stuff. So that was an easy get to knowing that I had Jimbo Fisher. I knew how he coached quarterback, because I had coached him as his quarterback coach.
Terry, going back to your Auburn days, and you referenced that you had that undefeated season in 1993. You later won the SEC West, got to Atlanta, the SEC championship game, came up a point short against Peyton Manning in Tennessee in 97. Every coach going back to Pat Dye before you at Auburn has done some combination of win the SEC, get to the SEC championship game, put together an undefeated season, and that includes Tommy Tuberville, Gene Chizik, Gus Malzahn. What is it about Auburn that all of you guys have had some pretty high-level success there over a long period of time?
I think there's an urgency at Auburn. You can't get too bad too long without losing your job. Because at Auburn, you're always going to be compared to the school across the state. It's not like you're at a state that doesn't have any other football team, and you can kind of lollygag around with an 8-win season over and over again. If you're not beating the team from across the state half the time or pretty close, you're not going to be there very long. So I think Auburn, there's always a sense of we better not let our guard down. We better not slow down. We better not mess up, because we're going to fall too far behind. Because when you can win, I always said to our team, if you can win the state championship in the state of Alabama, you can win the national championship. And so I think whether that is the same motivator at Alabama or whether it isn't, I know at Auburn, it's very important that our program stay as good or better than Alabama. And I know in my 5 years there, we were 3-2 against Alabama. The first 4 games was against a pretty good head coach, Gene Stallings. But that's kind of that to me, that was always the motivator, is you did not want to lose that state championship at Auburn.
And before you got to the last year, you're 46-12-1. The year before your last year, you're tied for first in the West, 10-3, and I think 29-10 in the SEC. I mean, when you look at that now, you'd be making $6 or $7 million right now. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, there's a lot of coaches that were coached 30 years ago or 25 years ago, wherever it was, that we didn't make the kind of money they make now. But I guess every professional athlete would be saying the same thing right now about that. It was just, it was we had some good success at Auburn, and hopefully the memories. I didn't always make the right decisions. I was a young coach, 36 years old when I went to Auburn. But I think overall, looking back, we were very competitive at Auburn those first 5 years we were there.
Is there one decision or so, Terry, that jumps out at you that if you could go back in time and redo things while you were at Auburn, that you would change?
I don't know, and I haven't thought about it for a long time. Sometimes you dwell on things in the past too much, and you create resentments, or you create things in your mind that aren't healthy. I wish I would have handled some of the inner conflicts at Auburn better. I didn't do a great job. I was very young, and you've got to understand politics at Auburn. I guess at Alabama too, the politics of the coaching profession, of how programs are run, and I did not. I guess I didn't handle that very well. I thought I was good at it, but wasn't good enough. And but overall, I'm at my age, 61 years old. I look back at my years at Auburn as almost all fun years. We had great 5 years were incredibly successful. We almost won the SEC championship in 1997, which was the year there were no Pat Dye players on the team. We had all of our guys. It was just a great bunch of coaches, and the fans were wonderful, and we had a great experience there. So, like I say, I wish I could have been a better coach for Auburn. I was young, and I probably made mistakes in how to handle the political part of it. But I did the best I could at that point, and I haven't looked back too much. I went to broadcasting, had a great time for 10 years broadcasting. Then the good Lord got me back into coaching. Here I am, 61 years old, and I'm entering my 24th year as a head coach. And I want to say this because I thought of it this morning when you told me you wanted to interview me. I think I may be the only guy that ever coached 3 universities in the state of Alabama. I think I'm the only only head coach ever to coach was, because it was Samford, North Alabama, and Auburn. So I do have my dad and mom are from Alabama, and it's kind of nice to have had an opportunity to coach at 3 different places in Alabama.
So, all right, so this happens at Auburn, and then Jimbo, that's when he joins the Saban train. So
yeah. When I left Auburn, I got into broadcasting. My coaches, I thought he went to like Memphis for a year or something. He did, or Cincinnati. I forget where he went.
It's Cincinnati. That's right.
Cincinnati.
Yeah.
But I knew. Of course, everyone knows the reputation of Nick, that he's hard work. If you don't like hard work, you're not going to last. You're going to leave. But I could have told you that Jimbo would fit right in. I mean, that's not going to affect him one bit. In fact, it's going to be right up his alley. So when he said that wasn't a problem for him, I could have told you that from the very first time I met him, that he would be a perfect fit for Nick Saban's staff, because that's his work ethic. And I'll be honest with you, when I was a graduate assistant at West Virginia, I used to watch the coaches and kind of try to see which one did this and which one did that. Nick was different way back then. He was different than the rest of them, even way back then.
Really?
In the way he worked, in his work ethic.
Terry, you made an interesting point earlier. I want to go back to, you said even you and Tommy weren't exactly carbon copies of your dad. In your personalities, your coaching styles. Do athletic directors sometimes make a mistake, because Nick Saban's at the top of the mountain now, the way your dad once was? And so many ADs, when they're hiring coaches, they're trying to hire the next Nick Saban or a Nick Saban clone, and so they hire his former assistants.
Yeah.
There's only one Nick Saban, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's a crapshoot right there. I mean, if you can pull an assistant from another – first of all, there's a head coach – and I think of Urban Meyer, who's up here in Ohio, and other head coaches that are dominant personalities that have incredible confidence and have a clear vision of exactly how they want things done. And you could pick 9 assistants, and as long as they do what the head coach says, they'll be successful. But they really doesn't have any kind of it doesn't say what kind of head coach they would be. So I don't know if that's I think ADs will do it because they hope while you're there you learn what his system is. You learn how to run things like he did, and that kind of makes sense. But the personality of a head coach is something that's a lot of it's inherent, a lot of it's born with, and then you're lucky if you get good mentoring and all of that together. But I think you are right. I think sometimes they think that this guy came from him, so he must be exactly the same. And at least half the time, that's not true.
Terry Bowden with us on Tide and Tiger, myself and Scott Griffin and Kevin Scarbinsky, AL.com. Has Jimbo evolved as an offensive coach away from you, or just evolved just from the game as the game has evolved?
Oh, he has to evolve. He's evolved. I mean, there's certain things you're going to do. What's the book on this? That's how you say it in football. The book on this guy, or there's the book on that guy. On 3rd and long or 2nd and long, he always does this, or in certain situations. I think you can always find a couple of things. But I know by the time I got to my third year at Auburn, I was running shot. Tommy and I were running something. My brother Tommy was my offensive coordinator. We were doing things so different than what Florida State was doing at that time. And that's when Florida State started stealing some of our ideas. But over time, I mean, I copied and emulated my father's play calling. If you remember, long before I got to be head coach, my dad he was probably the premier play caller in football. The game day play, the old ball coach was not Steve Spurrier during those days, the early days. My dad was doing it before Steve, and Steve was a great one. But I think as you expand your own knowledge of the game and you get influenced by other people, you change. So even I, at my middle days at Auburn, was a lot different than the I formation football that we ran in the 70s and 80s. Jimbo, likewise, has changed a lot because of the way things are done now. You know, there's an old saying, if you were the first guy to put in the wishbone, you won a national championship. And if you were the last guy to take it out, you got fired. And so you got to be on the front end of a curve. And so I think Jimbo has been smart enough to be on the front end of a curve. But I will say this, the one thing you see with Nick Saban influence is that you win championships with defense. And if you have a great defense, you're never going to be quite as wild on offense because you cannot run a fast break, no huddle offense and have a statistically good defense. It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to have a fast break, no huddle offense and have a statistically very good defense. They just don't go together because you either get ahead too fast and you put your subs in, or the other team gets too many plays trying to catch up, or you're so far ahead that you start playing loose zone. So I think Jimbo has gotten, even some of his offense has changed based on the fact that you win with championship defense.
Terry, I'm going to hit you with a fun fact and then a question.
All right.
And I don't know if you know this, as many former Nick Saban assistants who've become head coaches and have turned out to face him in games, none of them has ever beaten him. Is Jimbo in the best position given the amount of time he's been in Tallahassee? He's got his players there, he's got his program in place. And I don't know, you probably haven't broken this game down. Obviously, you're getting ready for a pretty important opener of your own against Penn State, as you said. But is he in the best position just program-wise to go against Nick Saban and maybe be that first Nick Saban disciple to beat him?
You know, that's an unbelievable statistic you just gave, because I can think of all the coaches that their mentors have beaten them, you know, over the years. Even Paul Bryant. I don't know if it was which coach. I remember he hugged him when he beat him. Maybe it was Pat Dye. I don't know.
Stallings.
Yeah, Gene Stallings. That's right. But that's an unusual stat. And I'll say this. He who has the best players almost always wins. So if Jimbo's got players equal to Alabama, he's got a good chance to win. If he doesn't, he's got a good chance to lose, and that's going to be the case. But they are 1-2. But I would say, you know, Jimbo's got a very good team. He's built a strong program. They are 1-2. They've won a national championship. Talent-wise, they'll be pretty close. I don't think anybody will be more talented than Alabama. And he'll have a good feel for what Nick does defensively, because he went against him in practice every day, went against his style every day. And I think Alabama defense or Nick Saban influence transcends defensive coordinators. It carries on from one to the other. So I think he's in a good position, but I don't. It might just be a luck of the draw that none of his assistants have beaten him, because I think even Nick would tell you what Bear Bryant said, what John Wooden said in basketball. The guy with the best football players, the guy with the best basketball players almost always wins. Very few times can you outcoach the other guy. And so I think Jimbo's got close football players to Alabama.
I love talking to Cutcliffe about quarterbacks. I think he's brilliant in that. I love talking to Jimbo too. His last three have gone in the first round. Ponder, Manuel, as you know, obviously Jameis Winston, Francois made great improvement. Well, what makes him reach quarterbacks besides the fact he played the position? What is it?
I haven't worked with him for a long time, but he was my quarterback, and I have to feel that there's some kind of relationship, a closeness that because I know when I was calling plays and I was working with quarterbacks, when I called a play, I wanted the quarterback to be thinking exactly what I was thinking. That if I called a play and I wanted the ball to be faked over here and thrown over there, I better be so close to my quarterback. I better be in his head. I better have traveled with him in the car or been with him enough that he's going to think exactly like me if I'm the play caller. Now, Jimbo's the play caller, and I think because the quarterback is the head coach on the field, I think he's a natural to have a great relationship with quarterbacks. I coach quarterbacks all my time, but I never played quarterback in my life. I could teach him where to throw. I just couldn't teach him how to throw. And but Jimbo has the ability to work with all that stuff. But I think that has a lot to do with it, because I think the quarterback has to understand what a play caller is thinking when he's calling a play. First option, second option, third option. And I think because of Jimbo, I know when Jimbo was with me, we lived every play, we lived every possibility. And I think he probably has that relationship with his quarterbacks. Besides being at LSU and Florida State and some places where you're going to get top quarterbacks now. You know, if Jimbo was at Samford, he wouldn't have a lot of NFL quarterbacks when we were there. But he's in a place where you can recruit top quarterbacks. And if you're a top quarterback, why wouldn't you want to go play for Jimbo Fisher?
Terry, there was a lot of chatter the last 2 years. 2 years ago when LSU was thinking about making a change, last year when they actually did make a change, that Jimbo was a guy that they really wanted to bring home as the head coach. Given what he's established in Tallahassee, could you see him staying there for the rest of his head coaching career? And obviously, none of us knows the future, but he seems like he's really put down roots there.
It's a good place to put down roots. It's a big, small town, or small, big town. It's a place where he's probably pretty comfortable. It's a laid back town. And I would think it's pretty comfortable. I think he can stay there as long as he wants to. There's Tommy Tuberville once said, I think you gain 10% popularity for every year at a program for about 10 years. Then every year after that, you lose 10% of your popularity. People, no matter how much you win, you can't. If you've built up a high degree of winning, eventually you're not going to keep. People will get tired of it, and that's the hardest thing for any coach. Is you keep winning, and at some point, now you got to win even more. And then all of a sudden, people don't treat you like they ought to treat you, and you say, "Well, I'll just go somewhere else." Now, I don't think that'll happen to Jimbo, and it shouldn't, because he can be there as long as he wants to be there. But you become your own worst enemy. My dad was very fortunate. Is that he didn't start off winning everything right away, but when he hit that 14-year stretch, it was toward the later end of his career, and it was getting better every year. So so it's Jimbo's creating his own monster there, and there'll be times where you just get sick and tired of people not being happy with the level of success that you've got. But I think unless he wants to go coach professional football anywhere, there's no place I think you could live and raise your family and have a great place to coach than at Florida State.
Final thought from me. You say that, and it's so hard, as you know, to replace a legend. And he's done it beautifully. A lot of that has to do with Bobby being gracious to him, setting him up as much as he can for success. But inevitably, as you said, it matters what you do on the field. You're in the middle of both of them. One's your dad, one's your prize pupil and ex-quarterback. How did he do that? Has he done it well? And did he seek any advice from you guys? Because you're so close. There's still pressure, though,
he couldn't have done it if he didn't win. If he didn't have the ability to be a winner, it wouldn't have happened. I mean, people are, when you start winning, they forget about the other guy. And I think you have to give him credit for one. He won, and he won big, and he won a championship. And that's what the people wanted. I don't think he pretends to be Bobby Bowden either. I don't think Jimbo, Jimbo's Jimbo, and he's a West Virginia guy that the storyteller, he has West Virginia written all over him. But he does, without trying to be Bobby Bowden, he knows who Bobby Bowden is. He knows what Bobby Bowden's like. He knows what Bobby Bowden acts like. He knows about everything about him. So I think there's probably a comfort zone there in who it was much more difficult if I couldn't be like Bobby Bowden because he was my dad, or Tommy, and Tommy's probably more like my dad than me. We had to be like him because he's our father. Jimbo just needed to win like him, and he has done that. If he's there long enough, he'll have the same kind of overall record per year average, I'm sure, as my father. But I think him knowing Bobby Bowden and what Bobby Bowden is like, and not necessarily having to be like Bobby Bowden, I think. And I want to give my dad credit here. My dad, when he left that job, he didn't go hang around and ask people to remember all Bobby Bowden. The worst thing that can happen to any coach is the previous coach hang around, and every time you do something, they'll say, well, they whisper, I wouldn't have done it like that. Or they whisper, I wouldn't have done it like that. And that does nothing. And it happens all the time. And it does nothing but hurt the new coach that comes in. So my dad did a great job of bowing out, not a little bit, but he bowed out completely.
The old coach hanging around. I think you may have experienced that once or so in your life.
Yes.
No idea what you're talking about.
Terry, before we let you go, as you said, you're getting ready to play Penn State, one of the favorites maybe to make the playoff this year. They had a great season last year under James Franklin. What keeps you going? You got to the got to a bowl game 2 years ago with Akron. It looked like you were headed that way last year. Your quarterback got hurt. How much longer do you want to stay in this crazy game and keep grinding week to week?
I've been very fortunate to get this second opportunity after 10 years in broadcasting. Very few people have ever made it back. I can't think of anybody in college football that have found a way to get back. Rick Neuheisel called me one day and says, I can't get a job. How'd you get a job? I said, Rick, just go take a Division II job. Go take a Division III job. You'll get hired. But if you think you're going to get a Division I job, forget it. It isn't going to happen that quick. But you know what? It's such an enjoyable time now because I don't have to fill Bobby Bowden's shoes like I thought I had to do when I was 30 years old. I don't have to prove. I can go out and coach young men, coach football. And Akron's a place where Akron's been a Division I football program for 30 years. 2 years ago, we won 8 games for the first time in school history as Division I team.
Wow.
We won their very first bowl game. So you can go to a lot of schools and you can't be better than Bear Bryant or you can't be better than Bobby Bowden. But you go to Akron, every little thing you accomplish is a milestone. And then you're getting to work. And I think at my age, 61 years old, we really do start to feel like we're making an impact with young people. We're actually caring a little bit more than how far we're going to go in our career and a little bit more of how far they're going to go in their career. And so I think I'm enjoying that a lot more. I've got Jeff Bowden with me. Todd Stroud with me at Samford. Chuck Amato is with me and some old coaches. And we are having a great time building this program. And I'm going to try to get to 65. And when I get to that, I hope I can get to 70. But I will not go past 70.
Okay. And finally, do you still get jacked up when the offense is rolling and you're in it and the moment, and it's no different, right?
If you don't like winning, you ain't going to win. If you don't get jacked up and excited about good football and about winning a big game, all those things, really, you don't need to be in the business because this is about being, and maybe that's the last thing I would say about Jimbo. When you think of all the characteristics of a successful coach, including Jimbo or Nick, they love to compete. I don't care what game you play, but if you played golf or you played poker, they'd want to beat you every single hand. And I think that's the one thing. If you don't love to compete and love to win a ball game, you need to get out of the business.
All right, Terry.
I got to share this one story, Scott, before Terry goes. He told me years and years ago when he was working in this state, he was so driven and he saw the big picture as well that he had calculated how many games he had to win per year for how many years to pass Bear Bryant in career victories. You remember that, Terry?
Can I finish the story? Because that was my first year. That was when I was a graduate assistant at Florida State, and I was 26 years old. I was in Birmingham, Alabama, recruiting Banks High School, and you remember when they had Banks High School?
Yeah.
And I was there the day they had the funeral for Bear Bryant, and it said on the front of the newspaper, Birmingham, Bear Bryant, 323 wins, greatest coach of all time, winningest of all time, passes the funeral. And I sat there in that phone booth. I'd gotten a call from the athletic director at Salem College, and I'm 26 years old. So I quickly start adding 8. If I could win 8 games a year, tying coach till I'm 69, which I think Bear Bryant did, I will have 324 wins. So I don't have to win national championships. So I didn't say I was going to win a bunch of national championships, but I did say I was going to have that. Unfortunately, I got about halfway.
Not too bad. 161 right now and still rolling. So I think you're going to get to 200 and beyond. It'll be a good career at the end of the day. Terry, thanks for hanging out with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Kevin.
All right. That was Terry Bowden with myself and Kevin. A lot of ground covered there. I feel like we covered decades. I'm exhausted.
And, what is it about guys from West Virginia? Not only can they coach football, but they are really fast talkers. I'm not sure who wins the fast talking game between Jimbo and Terry. But they were guys you could never keep up with just a notebook. You had to record your interviews with them because there was no way, I don't care how good you are at taking shorthand, you could not keep up with those two guys.
And I think Terry Bowden does not get his due for his time at Auburn. Yes, there were mistakes made and different things there, but the record we pointed out again, if he did that now anywhere in the SEC, they'd be building statues for you pretty soon.
Well, he made the mistake of being too good too soon.
Right.
Rather than building slowly, almost what Gus Malzahn has done. You come out of the box and you go undefeated the year after Alabama won the national championship under Gene Stallings, and Gene Stallings has his program established in Tuscaloosa. and you roll out of the box, you're on probation. You can't go to a bowl. You can't go to the SEC championship game. All you do is go 11-0, and you beat Alabama in Jordan-Hare Stadium. That's a tough act to follow. And they were really good the next year, and they were never terrible until his last year, when obviously he resigned midseason and things just completely unraveled for him in that program. But if he had done it the other way, if he had won 8 games, 9 games early, and then built towards an undefeated season, who knows how history might have been different.
Yeah, and the year before, the 1-5 when he left in the middle of the year, he's 10-3 and ties for the West. I mean, and
they go to the SEC championship game.
Right.
They play Peyton Manning in Tennessee. They lose by 1 point.
I mean, could have been,
who knows how things would have been different had they managed to win that game. We'll never know.
All right, so you heard him. Is Jimbo Fisher, as we wrap up, I think he's more Nick Saban than Kirby Smart, Will Muschamp, and those guys, even though those are defensive guys, as far as the way he runs a program, competitiveness and everything. You heard Terry explain he's Bowden as a play caller. What do you think now that you've heard from him? Your thoughts? I mean, I know it's quick and you hadn't had time to digest it, but what do you think?
Well, I think listening to Terry and following Jimbo's career and knowing him personally, Jimbo is better positioned for long-term success. And that's what all of these guys want. They don't want to be a flash in the pan and have 1 or 2 good seasons and then settle back into mediocrity. Jimbo is best positioned of all of Nick Saban's former assistants because he has the Bowden connection. He has the Bowden background. He has worked for not 1, but 2 of the best coaches in the history of college football.
Unbelievable. And they are ingrained in him, right? Ingrained.
It is part of his DNA to be a great football coach, and he stands on his own. And I thought the most telling thing that Terry said about Jimbo was Jimbo doesn't try to be Bobby Bowden. He doesn't try to be Nick Saban. Jimbo is Jimbo. And as long as he doesn't change, and at this point, he's not going to change. He is who he is. He knows who he is. He doesn't try to be anyone else. And I think that's the key to his success.
And the Nick Saban legend will only get stronger if Alabama can pull this one off in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And then, of course, the reverse is true. Jimbo Fisher's legend will obviously grow, right? It's a big game.
This is an important season for Jimbo.
Yeah.
Given what Dabo Swinney and Clemson have done the last 2 years, winning the ACC, getting to the national championship game, and then last year finally slaying the Dragon and beating Alabama in that championship game. Nick Saban's first loss in a national championship game. Now it's up to Jimbo and Florida State to take back the ACC from Dabo and Clemson. It's going to be fascinating to watch, starting with that first game Saturday night in Mercedes-Benz Stadium.
It's also the first time in history, Kevin, I don't know if you knew this, that an Alabama coach has faced in back-to-back games head coaches whose first name ends in O. I don't know if you realize that.
I wonder if it's the first time an Alabama coach has faced in back-to-back games coaches who have won national championships. How about that?
Now that's a better stat and less funny.
Yours is funnier, though.
But we'll be looking forward. We'll be looking to see.
You're the comedian, I'm the straight man.
All right. Are you riding with me to Atlanta or not?
Yes, as long as you let me drive.
Okay. All right. You can look for this article and different things on AL.com. All of Kevin Scarbinsky's articles, all my stuff on 99.1 FM Tide Tigers YouTube channel. For Kevin Scarbinsky of AL.com, Scott Griffin, Tide and Tigers podcast. We appreciate you hanging out with us. Let us know how you enjoyed the podcast with comments and different things, and we'll talk to you in a few days. Thanks for listening.